I got a comment the other day on one of my videos, and he said basically, it's hard to believe this isn't BS, to put it mildly or nicely. Well, I can agree these series might be a little bit difficult to believe or feel like they're really true, but honestly, I can understand that. And the reason is because some of these things are so way out there and so crazy, you just can't hardly believe it. And it probably does sound a little bit like BS, if you know what I'm talking about. Sheriff Vail Ennis, he was shot 5 times. He killed basically 7 men, was responsible for 8 deaths. And there was one story I hadn't told y'all about where he was driving down the highway one day on a call, had a highway patrolman riding with him, and he was going over 100 miles an hour. They said that old Vail, he went over 100 miles an hour everywhere he went in that old green Hornet he had. He was the fastest car in the county. He bragged about how fast it was. And by golly, this day he came around a curve and there was a big old truck stuck out in the middle of the highway. And all he had time to do was holler, "Duck!" Well, I guess he ducked, but the highway patrolman didn't, because it ripped the top plumb off of that old green Hornet that he had, and the highway patrolman didn't survive. I remember my dad telling me a story one time when he was in high school back in 1944, 45, somewhere in there, where he was in the band, and there the majorettes and the cheerleaders were all down there. You know how they get at the bottom of the bandstand down there at the football game, and there was a neighboring deputy sheriff that was there, and he was drunk, and he was harassing the pretty girls down there and giving them a hard time, flirting with them. And old Vail came along and picked up on it, and he basically, "Hey fella, you need to leave." Tried to escort him out. The guy didn't want to go peacefully, got in a ruckus, tried to pick a fight with old Vail. My dad said Vail just drew that Colt 44 out of his holster and wham, just knocked him over the head, and boom, he went down like that, out like a light. He said old Vail reached down there and grabbed him by the shirt collar, drug him out of that stadium, went and threw him in the back of his car, took him off to jail. And he saw that. My dad saw that firsthand. And I told you about the second story about the incident with the 3 guys out in the country on that custody dispute, that my junior high history teacher, Mr. Gale, his dad was the judge, the district judge that ordered Vail to go get those kids. And like I said, that whole story is in episode 2. It's fascinating. And that's when he used the Thompson submachine gun and cut those guys down, and ended up going to trial and tried for murder. And the jury took about 1 hour to acquit him and say, no, it was self-defense. This is foolish. You know, old Vail, he survived a lot of scrapes and was responsible for killing 3 men with a machine gun. He killed 2 guys, shot them each 6 times, shot another guy in the head and the back of his car, shot a guy in the jailhouse. And, it does kind of sound like it might be a Hollywood story of some sort or a Hollywood fiction movie, but let me tell you, this is true stories from back in South Texas back in the 1940s and early 1950s. By the late 1940s there in Beeville, South Texas, B County, old Sheriff Vail Ennis was already made out to be a hero, I guess you'd say, kind of a folklore. He was a big old fella, about 6 feet tall, 170 pounds. They said he had long arms and big hands, and he used to stand out front of the old American Cafe. I can remember that cafe. My granddad used to take us there when I was a kid for Mother's Day to treat the family. Anyway, that used to be the hangout for the old timers back in the 40s and 30s and 50s, back in that area. And he'd stand out there, and they said, man, he'd be going to town telling all these different stories. He liked to talk, kind of talk in a little bit of a high-pitched voice and just really talk fast. And old Vail built a reputation the hard way. He started off as a deputy, they said, back in about 1941. Well, in 1943, he was attacked by a fella and almost killed, and he managed to get through that scrape by killing the guy himself, so that was number 1. And then he was elected sheriff in 1944, and then shortly after his election, he had a scrape with one of the inmates there in the jail, and the guy was trying to get away. He went for Vail's gun. Vail got his gun out and shot him. That was victim number 2. And then in 1945, which I talked about in my second video, episode 2, Vail was ordered to go pick up some kids out in the country on a custody dispute. And he ended up killing 3 guys out there with a Thompson submachine gun. True story. got it all firsthand. And then later in that year, in June of 1945, is when he had the incident up at Pettis with the gas station with the two guys that he'd arrested. And one of them somehow or another had a gun, pulled a .38 Special out, and shot Vail 5 times in the stomach, almost killed him. Vail ended up, before he went down, putting 6 slugs each in those two guys and killed them right there on the spot. He almost didn't survive. They didn't think he was going to, but after about 3 or 4 days in the hospital, he pulled through. So they like, man, he did it again, pulled one out of the hat. So that was 7. And then of course the highway patrolman that died in that car accident, Vail didn't kill him, but he was responsible, I guess you might say, for his death. So pretty much 8 men lost their lives under Vail's tenure. And at the end of November 1945, after that shooting at the gas station where he killed those two guys and he got shot and nearly died, Time magazine did an article on him, called him the most recognizable lawman in the state of Texas. Pretty much made him an icon, and it went national. One of the citizens there in Beeville made a comment and said basically, those guys, they might as well just gone out and hung themselves rather than pulling a gun on old Vail. But that was old Vail. He didn't care who you were. He just upheld the law. And he used to have a saying. He would say, I can be your guardian or I can be your fate. You know, it's hard to imagine the way it was back then. I don't know if I've said this before, but old Vail used his own car, bought his own gas, had to pay for his own uniform. They didn't give him a deputy. He didn't have any investigators, no detectives, no crime lab. He took his own photographs at crime scenes with his own camera, developed the prints himself, the pictures and the prints himself, and used it for evidence or whatever. He didn't have a big budget. He lived at the jail on the bottom floor. The jail was up on top, 2-story building, and in the bottom is where he and his wife and his little daughter lived. He didn't have a deputy. He was basically, he was the county law by himself. You know, he was admired by many and considered a hero, and yet at the same time, there were others who immensely disliked him. He actually made enemies, believe it or not, because of the way that he ran the county. But he didn't play in politics, or play the politics game, I guess you'd say. And because of that, he lost his re-election bid for sheriff in 1952. And he just kind of moved on and lived a quiet life after that. He worked out in the oil field. I think he was a gauger out in the oil patch. And then finally in 1972, he lost his battle with cancer. He was buried right there in the Memorial Cemetery in Beeville, Texas. And regardless of whether you loved him or hated him, he definitely left his mark on South Texas history. Now, if you like these series and this particular video, this would be a good time to hit that little like button up there and maybe even subscribe to my channel and look at some of our other videos. I think some of them are pretty interesting. You might want to even share it with somebody that might like to see them. And if you would, go back and watch episode 1, 2, and 3. That'll bring you up to snuff where we are right here today. Shortly before old Vail passed away back in 1971 or 72 time frame, I was visiting with him one day. As I said before, he was a friend of the family, and I knew him and had visited with him before, and we were sitting there chewing the fat one day, and he just looked at me and he said, Bill, let me tell you something. I never killed nobody that didn't need killing. This was just old Vail. Vail was a true guardian, protector, and fearless law enforcer. That's just who he was. The last real sheriff in Texas. I want to thank y'all for watching and supporting me. I really appreciate it, and try to always remember, you never have to walk alone. Adios, amigos. Pops out.